You're telling me they just invented it? Like, on the spot? The Zavonian diplomat's third eye bulged slightly, a sign of extreme skepticism among his species. Pretty much, replied Commander Alex Reeves, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence that made his alien counterparts so uncomfortable. Give a human a rock and some sticks, and within an hour, they'll have fire, a spear, and probably a crude musical instrument to celebrate their accomplishments. The assembled representatives of the Galactic Conclave exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't going according to plan at all. Commander, began Shilnak, the proconsul of the Durelian Empire, his translucent skin pulsing with irritation. You must understand our concern. Your species entered our interspecies survival challenge and completely... What's your Earth expression? Ah yes, broke the game. Alex shrugged, a gesture that several alien diplomats flinched at, still not accustomed to the abrupt human body language. We followed your rules to the letter. No advanced technology, no pre-manufactured tools, just the clothes on our backs. Not our fault your people didn't specify no making your own tools in the fine print. That's because no one has ever done that before! Shrieked a small, feathered representative from the back of the chamber. It was implied. Ah well, Alex grinned. Humans aren't great with implications. We're more of a letter-of-the-law type species. And that's how I found myself, Alex Reeves, former Navy SEAL turned interstellar diplomat, explaining to a room full of the galaxy's most advanced species why humans had been unanimously banned from the Galactic Survival Championship after our first and only appearance. It all started about 3 months ago. This is bullshit, and you know it, I muttered, eyeing the desolate landscape through the dropship window. Lieutenant Colin Walsh, my second-in-command and the only other human on this expedition, snorted beside me. What gave it away? The fact we're being dropped on a death planet with nothing but our jumpsuits, or the fact these aliens are betting on how quickly we'll tap out? I shot him a sideways glance. Both. Definitely both. Walsh was a good kid. Well, 32 wasn't exactly a kid, but 15 years in Special Forces operations had me categorizing anyone under 40 as kid. He had that lanky, unassuming build that made people underestimate him, right up until he could outrun, outfight, and outthink them. His perpetually tousled brown hair and easy smile masked a tactical mind that had saved my ass more times than I cared to admit. Remind me why we agreed to this again? Walsh asked, adjusting the standard-issue jumpsuit that made both of us look like we'd been stuffed into blue sausage casings. Diplomatic relations. Earth needs allies. The Galactic Conclave wants entertainment. We're the dancing monkeys. I rattled off the official explanation from our briefing without enthusiasm. Right, and the real reason? I grinned despite myself. Because Admiral Hernandez bet the Arcturian High Commander that humans would outlast their champions. And if we win, Earth gets priority access to their antimatter production facilities. Oh, there it is. Walsh nodded sagely. Always follow the money. Or in this case, the fuel. The dropship lurched, and the Vesperian pilot, an insectoid being with 4 arms and what appeared to be a perpetual expression of disdain, chittered something through the universal translator device implanted behind our ears. We approach landing zone. Survival period begins upon disembarkation. Duration, 60 planetary rotations. Extraction coordinates will be provided at 30 rotations. Communication devices limited to emergency beacon only. I did quick mental math. With this planet's 26-hour rotation cycle, that was roughly 65 Earth days total, just over 2 months of survival time. Fantastic, I muttered. Over 2 months on an alien planet with nothing but our wits. And these stylish jumpsuits, Walsh added. Don't forget the jumpsuits. The craft touched down with a jolt that suggested our pilot wasn't particularly concerned with our comfort. The door hissed open, revealing a harsh landscape of crimson soil and strange, twisted vegetation beneath a sky the color of tarnished copper. Welcome to Nexus 9, the pilot announced. Atmosphere compatible with human respiration, though slightly lower oxygen content than Earth standard. Diurnal cycle 26 standard hours. Temperatures range from -10 to +45 degrees Celsius. Indigenous fauna primarily non-sentient but potentially dangerous. Cozy, Walsh remarked. Your competition has been deployed to separate regions, the pilot continued, ignoring the comment. No direct contact permitted between contestants. Survival skills only. No technological advantages. I stepped toward the exit, feeling the alien air, dry and metallic tasting, fill my lungs. Any last words of advice? The Vesperian's compound eyes gleamed with what might have been amusement. Try not to die too quickly. The betting pools favor your elimination within the first 5 rotations. Charming, Walsh said. Oh, and one more thing, the pilot added. All participants have agreed to continuous monitoring for entertainment purposes. Your actions will be broadcast throughout Conclave space. We're on alien reality TV, I said flatly. Wonderful. Good luck, humans, the pilot said, in a tone that clearly conveyed he believed we would need much more than luck. The moment we stepped off the ramp, the dropship sealed itself and lifted off with alarming speed, leaving us alone in the alien wilderness. Walsh turned to me, hands on his hips. So, Commander, what's the plan? I surveyed our surroundings more carefully now. The landing zone was a relatively flat area, surrounded by rolling hills covered in reddish vegetation that resembled a cross between ferns and cacti. In the distance, a mountain range thrust up against the copper sky, its peaks wrapped in clouds the color of bruises. First rule of survival, I said, slipping automatically into instructor mode. We need shelter, water, and food in that order. Standard procedure, then, Walsh nodded. I'll bet those mountains have water sources. Good thinking, but before we hike anywhere... I bent down and picked up a fist-sized rock with a sharp edge. Let's arm ourselves. Walsh grinned, immediately understanding my intention. I like where this is going. Within minutes, we had each selected suitable rocks and begun the process of knapping them into crude but effective cutting tools, a skill taught in basic survival training that went back to the earliest humans. You know, Walsh said, carefully striking his stone to create a sharp edge. I'm willing to bet most of our alien competitors don't even know how to make basic tools. That's what I'm counting on, I replied. Admiral Hernandez didn't pick us just because we're expendable. Speak for yourself, Walsh laughed. I've got a date with a lovely xenobiologist when we get back, and I fully intend to make it. By the time the alien's sun had moved perceptibly across the sky, we had fabricated several primitive but functional tools. Cutting edges, a hammerstone, and the beginnings of what would become spear points. Next up, I said, gathering our new implements, we find some straight branches for handles and binding material. And after that? Walsh asked, falling into step beside me as we headed toward a cluster of vegetation that looked promising. I grinned. After that, Lieutenant, we're going to show these aliens why humans dominated Earth despite being the squishiest species on the planet. Over the next 8 hours, we established our baseline survival situation. The vegetation, while alien, followed familiar enough patterns that we could identify likely candidates for tool-making materials. Several of the fern cacti hybrids had fibrous inner cores that, when stripped and dried, made excellent cordage. Others had straight, sturdy stalks that served well as spear shafts. You know what I'm thinking? Walsh said as we finished lashing stone points to our newly crafted spears. That we need fire before nightfall? I guessed. Exactly. He glanced up at the darkening sky. Temperature's already dropping. Plus, fire means cooked food, purified water, and keeping whatever passes for predators on this rock at a distance. I nodded, already gathering suitable materials for a fire drill. Hand drill or bow drill, what's your preference? Walsh considered for a moment. Bow drill. Faster results, and my shoulders are still sore from that gravity adjustment on the transport ship. We set to work, fashioning a simple bow from a flexible branch and some of our cordage. The drill itself was a straight stick, and the fireboard came from a piece of drier, softer wood we'd found. As Walsh operated the bow, driving the drill into the fireboard to create friction, I couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of our situation. Here we were, representatives of a species that had split the atom and sent probes beyond our solar system, reduced to making fire with sticks on an alien planet for the entertainment of beings with technology so advanced it bordered on magic. Got an ember! Walsh announced triumphantly, carefully transferring the glowing particle to our prepared tinder bundle. With gentle breaths, we coaxed the ember into flame, the red-orange glow strangely comforting on this alien world. As darkness fell, we had a respectable campfire burning in the center of a crude shelter constructed from branches and broad, leaf-like appendages from the local flora. Day 1 pretty successful, Walsh said, settling back against the wall of our shelter. Got tools, weapons, fire, and shelter. Not bad for a species that's supposedly technologically inferior. I nodded, poking at the fire with a stick. Tomorrow we focus on water and food. I noticed some tracks heading eastward, might lead to a water source. And where there's water, there's usually something to eat, Walsh agreed. Exactly. I paused, looking up at the unfamiliar stars now visible through gaps in the alien clouds. I wonder how our competition is faring. As it turned out, we didn't have to wonder for long. On the third day, as we were returning to our now improved shelter with several container-like seed pods filled with water from a spring we'd discovered, we encountered our first evidence of another contestant. Look, Walsh said quietly, pointing to a disturbance in the red soil about 50 meters ahead. I squinted against the harsh sunlight. Tracks too large to be native fauna based on what we've seen. We approached cautiously, our handcrafted spears at the ready. The tracks were unmistakably bipedal, but with an unusual three-toed footprint that reminded me of bird tracks, only much larger. Culvaxian, maybe? Walsh suggested. Or one of those tall avian species from Rigel? Could be, I agreed. Let's follow them, but keep our distance. No direct contact allowed, remember? But nothing says we can't observe. The tracks led us to the edge of a small depression, where, to our astonishment, we spotted a Draxlonian, a species known for their engineering prowess and somewhat superiority complex when it came to younger races like humans. This particular Draxlonian did not look particularly superior at the moment. He, at least I assumed it was a he, though alien gender dimorphism was always tricky, was huddled beneath an inadequate canopy of fallen vegetation, shivering despite the midday heat. No fire, no tools beyond what appeared to be a crudely broken branch, and from his lethargic movements, likely no water for some time. Shouldn't we help him? Walsh whispered. I shook my head reluctantly. Rules say no direct contact. Besides, if we interfere, we could get disqualified, and Earth needs that antimatter contract. So we just let him suffer? I considered for a moment, then grinned. Not exactly. We just can't make direct contact. We retreated a safe distance, and I explained my plan. 20 minutes later, we returned to the edge of the depression and, with deliberate noise, began constructing a fire just visible from the Draxlonian's position. You think he'll get the hint? Walsh asked as we ostentatiously demonstrated fire-making techniques. If he's smart enough to be selected for this competition, he should, I replied. We're just providing educational entertainment. Sure enough, the Draxlonian had taken notice of our activities. Though he maintained his distance as required by the rules, he was clearly observing our fire-making demonstration with intense interest. Once we were certain he'd seen enough to replicate the process, we gathered our things and departed, leaving the fire burning as a not-so-subtle lesson in survival. Humanitarian aid, alien edition, Walsh remarked as we hiked back toward our camp. Just paying it forward, I said. Though I'm starting to wonder, if a technologically advanced species like the Draxlonians doesn't know how to make fire from scratch, what other basic survival skills might our competitors be lacking? Walsh's grin widened. I'm thinking Earth's chances for that antimatter contract just got a whole lot better. By the end of the first week, we had established a surprisingly comfortable base camp. Our initial shelter had evolved into a sturdy hut reinforced with a framework of branches and covered with large, overlapping vegetation for waterproofing. We'd constructed stone-tipped spears, knives, hammers, and even crude axes. A fire pit with heat-reflecting stones provided warmth and cooking capability, while a smoking rack preserved meat from the rabbit-sized creatures we'd managed to hunt. Most importantly, we'd begun to understand the rhythm of this alien world. When and where to find water, which plants were useful for cordage or medicine, after careful testing, and the patterns of the local wildlife. You know what we need now, Walsh said one evening as we sat by our fire, processing the day's hunting haul. Indoor plumbing and Wi-Fi? I suggested dryly. He snorted. Always the dreamer. No, I was thinking we need better mobility. Scouting farther afield means more resources, more information about the terrain, and... He paused dramatically. More opportunities to accidentally demonstrate survival techniques to our struggling alien friends. I laughed. Over the past week, we'd accidentally demonstrated various survival techniques within observation distance of 3 different competitors, none of whom seemed to have mastered even the basics of shelter construction or fire-making. What are you suggesting? We fashion a couple of mountain bikes out of sticks? Nothing so ambitious, Walsh replied. But we could make snowshoes. I raised an eyebrow. Snowshoes? It's 40 degrees out there. Not for snow, he explained. For the mudflats we found yesterday. That red clay would suck our boots right off, but with the right footwear, we could cross it and access that forest on the other side. Bet there's all kinds of useful materials over there. Huh, I considered the idea. Primitive terrain-specific footwear. Not bad, Lieutenant. I was top of my class in advanced MacGyvering, he said with mock seriousness. The next day, we constructed crude but effective snowshoe-like contraptions, using flexible branches bent into oval shapes and laced with cordage in a webbed pattern. They looked ridiculous but worked surprisingly well when we tested them on the edge of the mudflats. Engineering at its finest, I declared, taking experimental steps on the slick red clay that had previously been impassable. Necessity, mother of invention, all that jazz, Walsh agreed, following close behind. Our crossing attracted the attention of not 1 but 2 alien competitors who had apparently been stymied by the same terrain obstacle. A Velian, recognizable by their blue-tinged skin and elongated cranium, and what appeared to be a Thoraxian, stocky with distinctive ridged forearms, watched our progress from opposite sides of the mud flat's perimeter. "Looks like we have an audience," Walsh murmured. "Let's make sure they get their money's worth," I replied. "Extra obvious demonstration of the snowshoe construction technique when we reach the other side?" "Absolutely." By the time we returned to our camp that evening, laden with new materials from the forest beyond the mudflats, we were both in surprisingly good spirits for people stranded on an alien planet in a survival competition. "You know what the funniest part is?" Walsh said as we organized our new acquisitions. "Back home, a lot of this knowledge is considered primitive or obsolete. Out here, it makes us look like survival gods. That's because most advanced species skipped the struggling against nature phase that dominated human history," I pointed out. "They developed their technology in more hospitable environments or evolved unique advantages. Humans had to get clever or die." "Lucky us," Walsh chuckled. "Thousands of years of being nature's punching bag finally pays off." I nodded, but something about the situation had been nagging at me. "Don't you think it's weird, though? All these advanced species, and none of them thought to bring even the most basic survival knowledge to a survival competition?" Walsh paused his work, brow furrowing. "Now that you mention it, yeah, that is strange. Almost like they didn't know they'd need it." I finished his thought. "Like maybe the rules changed just for us." We exchanged a long look as the implications sank in. "You think this whole thing is rigged?" Walsh asked finally. "Not rigged exactly," I replied slowly. "More like customized. The Conclave wanted to see how humans would fare under primitive conditions, because that's what they think we're good at. They probably expected us to struggle with the basics while they watched and felt superior. Instead, we're giving a masterclass in Stone Age survival techniques," Walsh grinned, "and inadvertently teaching their champions in the process." I leaned back, a slow smile spreading across my face. "You know what? Let's really give them a show." Over the next 2 weeks, we expanded our repertoire of primitive technology to a degree that would have made our ancient ancestors proud. We constructed a water filtration system using layers of sand, charcoal from our fires, and plant fibers. We built snares and fishing weirs to automate some of our food collection. We even fabricated clay containers, dried them in the sun, and used them for cooking and water storage. But our most ambitious project, the one that later had the Galactic Conclave in an uproar, came when we decided to create a forge. "A forge," Walsh repeated, staring at me as though I'd suggested we build a spaceship. "As in for metalworking." "Exactly," I confirmed, already gathering materials. "This red soil has high iron content. You can tell from the color and the way certain rocks have that metallic sheen. If we can build a furnace hot enough, we can smelt crude iron." "With sticks and rocks," he said flatly. "With sticks, rocks, and human ingenuity," I corrected him. "Indigenous peoples on Earth were smelting metals long before modern technology. It's basic chemistry and physics." Walsh shook his head, but I could see the excitement building in his eyes. "This is completely insane and absolutely perfect. Let's do it." The project took 4 days of intensive labor during our 3rd week. We constructed a clay furnace reinforced with stone, created a bellows system using animal hides and hollow plant stems, and gathered the iron-rich soil and charcoal needed for the smelting process. "If this works," Walsh said as we prepared for our first attempt, "we will officially be the most extra contestants in the history of this competition." "When this works," I corrected him, "we'll be the first humans to forge metal on an alien planet using Stone Age technology." That's got to count for something. To our surprise, and despite several false starts, it actually worked. The resulting iron bloom was small and impure, but definitely iron. We spent another 2 days refining our process and eventually produced enough workable metal to forge 2 crude but functional knife blades. "I wish I could see the looks on their faces," Walsh said, admiring our handiwork. "From sticks and stones to ironworking in less than a month. That's got to be some kind of galactic record." "I'm more interested in the practical applications," I replied, testing the edge of my new blade. "These will make hunting and processing food much easier." "Always the pragmatist," he chuckled. Our metalworking activities had drawn quite an audience, though all maintained the required distance. By this point, at least 5 different alien competitors had established camps within observation range of ours, clearly studying our techniques and attempting to replicate them with varying degrees of success. "We've started a Stone Age renaissance," Walsh observed one morning as we watched a Quilarian awkwardly attempting to nap a stone tool. "Should we charge tuition?" "Consider it diplomatic outreach," I replied. "Building goodwill through educational exchange." The situation grew increasingly amusing as we realized our alien observers were now trading techniques among themselves. Fire-making knowledge from one being exchanged for shelter-building tips from another. An impromptu survival school had developed with humans as the unwitting instructors. "This is not how I expected interspecies cultural exchange to go," Walsh remarked. "Necessity makes for strange classrooms," I agreed. On the 30th day, exactly halfway through our scheduled time on Nexus 9, our communication devices activated with a soft chime. As promised, the extraction coordinates appeared on the small screen, a location approximately 40 kilometers to the northwest, along with a simple message. "Proceed to extraction point within remaining 30 rotations. Early arrival permitted. Last arrival considered final ranking." Walsh studied the crude map display. "So it's a race now." "Looks that way," I agreed. "Though 40 kilometers in 35 Earth days should be manageable. Unless..." Walsh's eyes narrowed in thought. "What if that's the point? We're supposed to think it's easy, take our time, and then discover some obstacle that makes us wish we'd started sooner." I considered this. "Psychological warfare. I like your thinking. So we prepare as if we're expecting complications." "Exactly. And I'm betting our alien friends will be doing the same, now that they've picked up a few survival tricks." We spent the next day planning our approach. The direct route to the extraction point would take us through several challenging terrain features, including a series of steep ridges and what appeared to be a wide river crossing. "We could build a raft," Walsh suggested as we discussed the river obstacle. "Possible, but time-consuming," I replied. "Let's keep that as plan B. If we can find a narrower crossing point, we might be able to fell a tree as a bridge, or construct something simpler." "Fair enough. What about supplies? Travel light or bring the kitchen sink?" I weighed our options. Lightweight but comprehensive. Basic tools, weapons, fire-starting kit, 2 days' worth of preserved food, and water containers we can refill along the way. Anything we can't carry, we cache here in case we need to return. Walsh nodded. "Sounds like a plan. When do we move out?" "Tomorrow at first light," I decided. That gives us plenty of time to reach the extraction point, even with delays, and it might give us an edge over the competition. The next morning, we dismantled our camp, carefully storing anything we might need if forced to return, and set out northwest toward the extraction coordinates. The alien landscape had become almost familiar over the past month, though the copper sky and red vegetation still reminded us we were far from home. 10 clicks today if we maintain pace," I said as we marched across the rolling terrain. "Should put us at the edge of those ridges by nightfall. Gives us all of tomorrow to navigate them," Walsh agreed. "Smart." We made good progress through the morning, but by midday, an unexpected development forced us to adjust our plans. As we crested a small hill, we spotted a meridian, an aquatic species with a humanoid upper body but powerful, fin-like lower limbs, struggling to traverse the increasingly dry terrain. The meridian's skin was visibly drying out, taking on a worrying pallor that suggested severe dehydration. Though the rules prevented direct contact, it was clear the being was in genuine distress. "This isn't part of the competition anymore," I said quietly to Walsh. "That's a medical emergency." Walsh nodded grimly. "Agreed. Rules or no rules, we can't just let them die." We approached cautiously, making our presence known before getting too close. The Meridian looked up, large multifaceted eyes cloudy with exhaustion. "We're here to help," I said clearly, hoping the universal translators were still functioning properly. "You need water and shade." The Meridian made a weak gesture that could have meant anything but didn't actively retreat as we came closer. Working quickly, we constructed a simple shade structure and brought water from our supplies. Rather than hand it directly to the Meridian, which might violate the non-contact rule, we placed it within easy reach and stepped back. The being consumed the water gratefully, its color improving almost immediately. Through halting translator-assisted communication, we learned that the Meridian, whose name translated roughly as deep current, had been attempting to reach the extraction point but had miscalculated the aridity of the terrain. "You go extraction?" Deep Current asked, gesturing in the general direction we'd been heading. "Yes," I confirmed. "We're heading that way now." "Together go?" the Meridian suggested hesitantly. "Not contact, but near safety numbers." I exchanged a glance with Walsh, who gave a subtle nod. "We can travel in the same direction," I agreed carefully. "Not together, but parallel, if you can keep up." What followed was one of the strangest hiking arrangements I've ever experienced. We maintained a careful distance of about 20 meters from Deep Current, close enough to keep an eye on the Meridian's condition, but far enough to technically honor the non-contact rule. We adjusted our pace to accommodate the aliens' difficulties with the terrain, which slowed our progress, but felt like the right thing to do. By evening, we'd covered only 7 kilometers instead of our planned 10, but everyone was still in one piece. We made camp, Or rather, 3 separate camps arranged in a loose triangle, and prepared for the night. Think we'll get disqualified for this? Walsh asked quietly as we sat by our fire, occasionally glancing over to where Deep Current had constructed a surprisingly adequate shelter using techniques clearly modeled after our earlier demonstrations. Honestly, I don't care, I replied. Some things are more important than winning a competition. Agreed, Walsh said. Though I will point out that nothing in the rules explicitly forbids traveling in proximity, just direct assistance. I smiled. Always looking for the loophole, aren't you? It's a gift, he grinned. The next morning brought another surprise. As we prepared to continue our journey, we spotted 2 more competitors approaching from the east, a Velian and a Taraxian, the same ones who had observed our mudflat crossing earlier in the competition. Looks like our survival school graduates have found us, Walsh murmured. The newcomers maintained the required distance, but made it clear through gestures and broken translator communications that they, too, wished to travel in the same general direction as our strange caravan. The more the merrier, Walsh suggested with a shrug. Strength in numbers, I agreed. Though this is starting to feel less like a competition and more like an interspecies hiking club. And so our group grew. By the end of the day, we had navigated the ridge system, helping each other indirectly by demonstrating techniques for safe climbing and descent, and made camp on the other side. Our strange, spread-out caravan now numbered 5. 2 humans, 1 Meridian, 1 Velian, and 1 Taraxian. This has to be the weirdest diplomatic mission I've ever been part of, Walsh remarked that evening. Is that what we're calling it now? I chuckled. Well, we're certainly building better interspecies relations than any official function I've attended, he pointed out. Nothing brings people, or non-people, together like shared adversity. I had to admit he had a point. Though we maintained our separate camps and the required distance, there was a growing sense of camaraderie among our disparate group. We shared information about the terrain ahead, took turns scouting for the best routes, and even began developing a rudimentary common sign language to communicate across distances without relying on the sometimes glitchy translators. By the 4th day of our journey, we had reached the river obstacle, a wide, fast-flowing waterway with a distinctive purplish tinge that made me instinctively wary of entering it. Any ideas? Walsh asked as we surveyed the challenging obstacle. Before I could answer, our Velian companion, whose name translated approximately to quick thought, approached the edge of our 20-meter boundary and made a series of gestures we had come to recognize as a request for attention. Quick thought pointed upstream, then made a walking motion with his fingers, followed by a narrowing gesture. I think he's saying the river narrows upstream, Walsh interpreted. I nodded agreement. Worth investigating. Let's send a scouting party. Through our improvised sign language, we organized a coordinated effort. Quick Thought and I would scout upstream, while Walsh, Deep Current, and the Taraxian, who called himself Stone Shaper, would remain at our current position and begin gathering materials for potential bridge or raft construction. The scouting mission proved fruitful. About 3 kilometers upstream, the river indeed narrowed significantly and featured several large boulders that created natural stepping stones across most of its width. With some careful engineering, and the convenient fallen tree we found nearby, we could create a safe crossing point. When we returned with the news, our odd fellowship set to work. Though still maintaining the technical prohibition against direct contact, we found creative ways to collaborate. Humans demonstrated tool use and weight distribution principles. The Taraxian applied unexpected strength to moving the larger logs. The Velian calculated the optimal placement for support structures. And the Meridian, in their element in the water, secured the underwater portions of our makeshift bridge. By sunset, we had constructed a functional, if somewhat precarious, crossing. One by one, we made our way across the river, each using slightly different techniques adapted to our respective physiologies. Engineering triumph or death trap? Walsh wondered aloud as we watched Stone Shaper become the last to cross, the bridge creaking ominously beneath his considerable weight. Yes, I replied simply. We made camp on the far side of the river, our strange caravan now more tightly clustered than before, though still maintaining the required separation. That night, as we sat around our respective fires, I noticed something remarkable. Without prompting, each group had begun sharing food items with the others, placing offerings at the boundaries of our camps. It wasn't direct contact, but it was unmistakably cooperation. Exactly the kind of interspecies goodwill that I suspected the Galactic Conclave had never anticipated from their contrived competition. We've gone from survival school to cultural exchange program, Walsh observed, accepting a strange, fruit-like offering from Quick Thought with a grateful nod. Admiral Hernandez is going to love this, I chuckled. Not only are we going to win this thing, but we've also made friends along the way. Talk about exceeding mission parameters. The remainder of our journey proved less eventful than the river crossing, but no less interesting from a diplomatic perspective. Our group continued to grow, adding 2 more aliens, a Draxlonian engineer and a spindly being of a species I didn't recognize, who had been observing our river-crossing triumph from a distance. By the time we approached the extraction coordinates, our not-a-team team numbered 7 different species, all maintaining the letter of the non-contact rule, while cooperatively sharing the knowledge and skills needed to survive. The extraction point itself was a circular clearing marked with the Galactic Conclave symbol burned into the red soil. A small communication device at the center activated as we approached, projecting a holographic message. Congratulations on reaching the extraction point. You have completed the Galactic Survival Championship. Final rankings will be determined by order of arrival and overall survival condition. Please stand by for extraction. I looked around at our strange assembly, each group maintaining their separate position but unmistakably together in spirit. We had all arrived simultaneously by unspoken agreement, refusing to turn the final approach into a competitive sprint. So, Walsh said quietly, "Think we made an impression?" I smiled, watching as our alien companions exchanged gestures of congratulation across the distance that separated them. I think we've given them something to talk about, at the very least. The extraction ships arrived within the hour, 7 different crafts descending simultaneously to collect their respective competitors. As I stepped toward our human shuttle, I caught the eye of Deep Current, who made a gesture we had come to recognize as respect and gratitude. One by one, the others did the same. I returned the gesture, feeling a surprising twinge of regret at the separation. "Until next time," I called out, though I wasn't sure if their translators would catch it. As our shuttle lifted off, Walsh settled into the seat beside me with a satisfied sigh. "Mission accomplished, I'd say." "The mission, yes," I agreed. "But I think we might have started something bigger than just winning a competition." "Interstellar incident?" he suggested with a grin. "Interstellar friendship," I corrected, though the Conclave might see it as the same thing. Which brings us back to the present, with me standing before the assembled dignitaries of the Galactic Conclave, trying to explain why humans had been unanimously banned from future survival championships despite technically winning the competition. "Let me see if I understand correctly," said Ambassador Trell Knox, her translucent tendrils waving in what I'd come to recognize as agitation. "You not only created advanced tools from nothing, which was unprecedented, but you also taught other competitors to do the same, and then formed a cooperative group despite the explicitly competitive nature of the event?" "That about sums it up," I replied, with a casual shrug that sent another ripple of discomfort through the alien delegation. Though I should point out that we maintained the required physical distance at all times. No direct contact occurred. "This is not how the survival championship was meant to function," muttered Proconsul Zilnak. "With all due respect," I countered, "the rules stated that contestants would be evaluated on their ability to survive in primitive conditions using only their inherent capabilities. That's exactly what we did. Humans have been making tools since before we had written language. It's one of our inherent capabilities." "And the cooperation?" pressed a Meridian representative who looked suspiciously like Deep Current, though protocol prevented me from acknowledging our prior acquaintance. "Also inherently human," I explained. "We're a social species. Throughout our history, cooperation has been one of our primary survival strategies. When faced with environmental challenges, humans naturally form communities and share knowledge." Walsh, standing at parade rest behind me, added helpfully, "It's literally in our DNA." The assembled representatives exchanged glances loaded with meaning I couldn't quite interpret. Finally, the head of the conclave, Grand Arbiter Vosseth, leaned forward. "Commander Reeves," he began, his voice a rumbling bass that my translator rendered with impressive fidelity. "While your performance in the championship was technically within the letter of the rules, the spirit of the competition has been fundamentally altered by human participation." "I'm not sure I follow," I said, though I had a pretty good idea where this was heading. "To be blunt," Vosseth continued, "the Survival Championship was designed to showcase the individual resilience and adaptability of different species under adverse conditions. It was not intended to become what did your lieutenant call it? A primitive technology workshop and interspecies mixer." There was a ripple of what might have been laughter from some of the delegates, quickly suppressed. "Furthermore," the Grand Arbiter went on, "the introduction of metallurgy within a 28-day period from a starting point of no technology whatsoever has been deemed excessive." "Excessive?" I repeated, unable to keep a note of pride from my voice. "Or impressive?" "Both," admitted Voseth, with what I could swear was a hint of reluctant admiration. Nevertheless, the Conclave has unanimously voted to amend the rules of future championships to specifically prohibit tool-making beyond simple utilization of naturally occurring objects, and to enforce stricter separation of contestants. So we're banned, Walsh summarized from behind me. Not banned, corrected Voseth. Humanity has been declared the permanent champion of the traditional survival category, which has now been retired. A new competition format will be developed with more specific constraints. I exchanged a glance with Walsh, who was clearly struggling not to laugh. We'll accept that honor on behalf of Earth, I said formally. There is one more matter, the Grand Arbiter added. The matter of the wager between your Admiral Hernandez and the Arcturian High Commander. Ah, yes. The real reason we'd been dropped on that death planet in the first place. The antimatter production agreement that could revolutionize Earth's energy infrastructure and deep space capabilities. As humanity has demonstrated exceptional performance, Voseth continued. The terms of the wager will be honored. Additionally, the Conclave wishes to open discussions regarding a cultural exchange program, specifically focused on what you call primitive technology and survival skills. Several member species have expressed interest in learning these techniques, which appear to have been largely lost during their technological development. I blinked, momentarily stunned. You want us to teach you how to make stone tools and fire? Among other skills, yes, confirmed Voseth. Many of our member species have evolved or developed in environments where such skills were unnecessary, or their technological development followed alternative paths. The ability to create sophisticated tools from raw materials using only innate knowledge is uncommon in the galaxy, it seems. Walsh leaned forward slightly. Permission to speak freely, Commander? I nodded, curious about what he had to say. What the Grand Arbiter is saying, Walsh explained with barely concealed amusement, is that humans are basically the galaxy's wilderness survival experts. We're space cavemen, and now they want us to teach survival skills classes. I would not have phrased it quite that way, Voseth said stiffly, but the essence is correct. I couldn't help but laugh. So let me get this straight. We went from being seen as a primitive, barely space-capable species to being recognized as having unique and valuable knowledge that the Conclave wants to acquire. All because we made some pointy sticks in a forge and built diplomatic bridges. Literal and figurative ones, Walsh added. Voseth's expression was unreadable to my human eyes, but his tone conveyed a certain dry humor. Commander Reeves, you have demonstrated that humanity possesses capabilities that were unanticipated by the Conclave. We prefer to view this as an opportunity for mutual benefit rather than merely an unexpected competition outcome. Politically savvy, I noted appreciatively. Earth would be honored to participate in such an exchange program. And so, in a twist that I'm fairly certain no one at Earth Command could have predicted, I found myself appointed as the first official primitive technology and survival skills ambassador to the Galactic Conclave, with Walsh as my deputy. Our first cohort of students included representatives from 15 different species, including all our companions from Nexus 9. The curriculum included everything from basic fire-making and shelter construction to simple metallurgy and food preservation techniques. The Conclave provided a training facility on a habitable moon with diverse ecosystems, where we could demonstrate survival skills in various environments. Still can't believe this is actually our job now, Walsh remarked one evening as we sat around a teaching fire with a group of alien diplomats and scientists, making fires and pointy sticks for the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Deep Current, who had dropped all pretense of not knowing us once the competition ended, manipulated the coals with a stick in precise imitation of my earlier demonstration. Human perspective, valuable, the Meridian said carefully, the universal translator now working more smoothly in our casual setting. Each species follows unique evolutionary path. Humanity's strengths complement our own. That's very diplomatic of you, I replied with a smile. Not diplomacy, truth, Deep Current insisted. My people, technology from ocean materials. Metals rare, fire impossible underwater. Unique evolutionary pressures. Quick thought, the Velian nodded in agreement. Each species develops according to their environmental pressures. Velians evolved in low-gravity environments with abundant, readily available energy sources. We never needed to harness fire for survival or develop physical tool-making to the extent humans did. Instead, you developed those incredible mathematical abilities, Walsh noted, genuinely impressed. We'd discovered that Velians could perform complex calculations mentally that would require computers for most humans. Complementary adaptations, Quick Thought agreed, echoing Deep Current's sentiment. Stone Shaper, the Taraxian who had become something of a star pupil in our metallurgy classes, joined the conversation. Human history, constant struggle, make you adapt, make you inventive. I considered this. That's a fair assessment. Earth isn't particularly hospitable in many regions, and human physiology isn't particularly impressive. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most naturally protected species on our planet. We had to get clever to survive. Necessity mothers invention, Walsh added, quoting the old Earth saying. This explains much. Stone Shaper nodded thoughtfully. Taraxians evolved with natural armor, strength, fewer predators, less need for tools, fire. As the conversation continued, I found myself reflecting on the strange turn of events that had led us here. What had started as a competitive spectacle designed to entertain the galactic conclave, and possibly embarrass the upstart humans, had transformed into something far more valuable, genuine cultural exchange and mutual appreciation. The conclave had expected us to struggle with primitive conditions because they viewed humans as a technologically inferior species. Instead, we had demonstrated that what they saw as primitive was actually a sophisticated set of survival skills that had been fundamental to human development, skills that many advanced species had never needed to develop. You know what the real irony is? I said to Walsh later, after our students had retired to their quarters. They thought they were putting us at a disadvantage by stripping away technology, but they actually gave us the perfect opportunity to showcase what humans do best: adapt, improvise, and overcome. Walsh raised his mug in a toast to being the galaxy's premier cave people. I laughed and clinked my mug against his. To unexpected diplomatic success. And to Admiral Hernandez, Walsh added with a grin, who's probably still trying to figure out how her survival competition bet turned into a cultural exchange program and exclusive antimatter production deal. I'm sure she'll take full credit, I replied dryly. Oh, undoubtedly, Walsh agreed. But we know the truth. Which is? Walsh's expression grew more serious. That the most valuable technology humans have to offer the galaxy might not be our starships or our computers, but something much more fundamental. Our stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Our drive to create tools to overcome our environment rather than simply adapting to it. And our instinct to work together even when the rules say we shouldn't. I considered his words, surprisingly profound for a fireside chat after a long day of teaching aliens how to nap stone tools. That's actually quite insightful, Lieutenant. I have my moments, he replied with a modest shrug. Besides, all that philosophical stuff aside, you have to admit it's pretty damn funny that we impressed the galaxy's most advanced civilizations by making sharp sticks and banging rocks together. I laughed, the sound carrying through the alien night. When you put it that way, it does sound ridiculous. Ridiculously human, Walsh corrected. Ridiculously, wonderfully human, I agreed, raising my mug once more to the stars above this alien world where, somehow, the most primitive human skills had forged the most advanced diplomatic connections. 6 months later, the Galactic Conclave formally recognized Earth as the leading authority on survival skills and primitive technology adaptation. Our cultural exchange program had expanded to include training facilities on 3 different worlds, with a waiting list of species eager to learn what many now refer to as the human approach to environmental challenges. More significantly, the experience had fundamentally shifted the Conclave's perception of humanity. No longer viewed as merely a young, technologically developing species, humans were now recognized for our unique adaptability, our innovative problem-solving, and our tendency toward cooperation even in competitive situations. Traits that turned out to be rarer in the galaxy than FTL travel. Congratulations, Commander, Admiral Hernandez said during my promotion ceremony back on Earth. Your unorthodox approach to the survival championship has yielded diplomatic benefits beyond our most optimistic projections. Thank you, Admiral, I replied. Though I should point out that all we really did was demonstrate basic human survival techniques. Sometimes, she said with unusual thoughtfulness, the most profound diplomatic statements are the simplest ones. You showed the Conclave something about humanity they hadn't understood before. That we're clever apes who like making tools and helping each other, I suggested. The Admiral almost smiled, a rare event. That despite our relative youth as a spacefaring civilization, we bring unique and valuable perspectives to the galactic community. Perspectives born from our particular evolutionary path and planetary conditions. I thought about the diverse alien students I'd taught over the past months, each bringing their own physiological advantages and limitations to the learning process. Complementary strengths, I murmured, echoing Deep Current's insight. Precisely, Admiral Hernandez agreed. And speaking of complementary strengths, your new assignment is ready? I raised an eyebrow. New assignment? She handed me a datapad. The Conclave has requested an expanded exchange program. Not just teaching our primitive survival techniques to them, but learning some of their specialized adaptations as well. They've proposed a joint expedition to a newly discovered habitable world. Humans and representatives from 6 other species, working together to explore and establish a research outpost. I scanned the details, feeling a spark of excitement. So we're moving from survival competition to cooperative exploration? Indeed, and you'll be leading the human contingent. The Admiral's expression turned slightly mischievous, another rarity. Try not to revolutionize interspecies relations this time. The diplomatic corps is still catching up from your last innovation. I grinned. No promises, Admiral. Adaptation is what we humans do best. As I left the Admiral's office, I received a message from Walsh, who had already been briefed on our new assignment. Ready for Primitive Technology Ambassador. The sequel? I'm packing extra rocks for napping, just in case. I laughed, drawing curious glances from passing officers. Our unexpected journey from survival contestants to cultural ambassadors was taking yet another turn, and I couldn't wait to see where it led next. After all, if there's one thing humans excel at, it's turning adversity into opportunity. Even if that opportunity involves teaching the galaxy's most advanced civilizations how to make fire with sticks. Sometimes it turns out the oldest technologies are the most revolutionary. End. Tell me what happened! Zara's voice cracked through the comm channel like a whip. And honestly, I couldn't blame her. If some random alien had just announced they'd met my dead father and owed him a planetary favor, I'd probably be demanding answers too. Look, kid, I said, adjusting my position in the cramped cockpit of my salvage ship. Bad decisions. It's a long story, and frankly, I'm not sure you're gonna believe it. Try me. The steel in her voice reminded me so much of her old man that I actually laughed. Big mistake. The comm went dead silent, and I could practically feel the temperature drop through the vacuum of space. Sorry, I said quickly. It's just, you sound exactly like him when you get pissed. Same tone, same everything. It's uncanny. You really knew my father? And there it was. The crack in her armor. The tiny note of hope that she was trying so hard to hide. Hell, I'd been there. When someone you love dies in the black, you cling to any connection, any story, any proof that they mattered. Yeah, I knew him. James Kellerman, right? Engineer, stubborn as a mule, had this weird habit of humming old Earth songs when he worked. Silence. Then, how did you... Because I watched him build my entire world, sweetheart. Literally. And I mean that in the most literal sense possible. Let me back up here, because this is where the story gets weird. And I mean weird, not just, oh look, another human doing something impossible weird. Though to be fair, it's definitely that too. 3 years ago I was dying. Not the dramatic, heroic kind of dying. The slow, embarrassing kind where your body just gives up because you've been breathing recycled air and eating synthetic protein for too long. My homeworld, Kepler 442c, had been strip-mined to death by the hegemony. They'd sucked out every useful mineral, poisoned the atmosphere, and left the survivors to slowly suffocate on a dead rock. Fun times. I'd managed to scrape together enough credits for a one-way ticket off-world, figuring I'd rather die in space than watch my planet's corpse rot around me. That's when I met your father. He was just there, I continued, watching the stars drift past my viewport. Sitting in the spaceport bar on Kepler Station, nursing a whiskey and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I was 3 drinks in and feeling philosophical about my impending doom when he struck up a conversation. What did he say? He asked me what I'd do if I could save my world. Just like that. No build-up, no small talk. What would you do if you could save your world? Like he was asking about the weather. The truth was I'd laughed at him. Here was this human. And humans had a reputation for being crazy, sure, but they were also known for being broke as hell, asking me about saving planets like it was some casual Tuesday activity. I told him I'd probably start by finding a way to reverse atmospheric toxification, but that it would take technology we didn't have and resources we couldn't afford. You know what he said? What? He said, well, that's convenient. I happen to have both. Zara made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. That sounds like him, always making impossible promises. Yeah, well, this time he delivered. And that's the part that still makes my head spin. Because James Kellerman, human, broke, supposedly just another refugee from Earth's diaspora, proceeded to save my entire world. And he did it in the most human way possible, by completely ignoring every rule of physics, economics, and common sense. He started by buying my planet. He what? Bought it. The whole thing. Turns out the hegemony was so eager to get rid of what they considered a worthless hunk of rock that they were willing to sell it for practically nothing. Your dad showed up with a credit chip and a contract and just bought Kepler 442c. I could hear Zara's breathing through the comm. How did he have that kind of money? That's what I asked him. You know what he told me? Patent royalties. Apparently, he'd invented some kind of atmospheric processor that could break down toxins and convert them into breathable air. The hegemony had been using his design for decades without paying him a single credit. So he sued them? Oh, he did more than sue them. He sued them, won, and then demanded payment in the form of industrial equipment and raw materials instead of credits. Said money was just numbers on a screen, but gear? Gear could rebuild worlds. It was brilliant, really. Insane, but brilliant. The hegemony found themselves legally obligated to provide James with enough terraforming equipment to rebuild 3 planets, all because they'd been too arrogant to pay patent fees to some random human. But here's where it gets interesting, I said, settling back in my pilot's seat. He didn't just fix the atmosphere and call it a day. Oh no, that would have been too simple. Your dad decided to completely redesign my world's ecosystem from the ground up. What do you mean? I mean he turned Kepler 442c into a paradise. Not just habitable, perfect. He engineered plants that could grow in previously barren soil, created weather systems that would maintain themselves for centuries, and built cities that could expand and contract based on population needs. And that's when I realized I was dealing with something more than just a clever engineer. James Kellerman was an artist, and his canvas was an entire world. He worked for 2 years straight, I continued. Barely stopped to eat or sleep. I tried to help where I could, but most of the time I just watched him work. And that's when I noticed the humming. He hummed when he was concentrating, Zara said softly. Always old songs, Earth songs. Yeah, blue skies, somewhere over the rainbow, that kind of thing. Said it helped him think. But there was one song he hummed more than any other, especially when he was working on the residential districts. I paused, because this was the part that still got to me. He hummed Puff the Magic Dragon while he built the children's play areas. Every single one of them. Said it was his daughter's favorite song when she was little. The comm went quiet again, and I gave her a moment. Hell, I needed a moment too. Even 3 years later, thinking about James and his quiet dedication to a daughter he'd never see again made my throat tight. He talked about you, you know, I said finally. Not all the time, but enough. He was proud of you. Said you were studying xenobiology, that you wanted to help species find new ways to coexist. He told you that? He told me a lot of things. Mostly late at night, when we were sitting around the construction sites, waiting for the atmospheric processors to finish their cycles. He'd talk about Earth, about what he'd left behind, about the mistakes he'd made. What mistakes? And there was the question I'd been dreading. Because the truth was, James Kellerman had been running from something when I met him. Not the law, not creditors, but something much worse, his own guilt. He blamed himself for leaving Earth, I said carefully. For leaving you. Said he'd thought he was doing the right thing, going out into the galaxy to find opportunities, to build something better for his family. But then the communications went dark, and he couldn't get back. It was a common story, unfortunately. The early days of human expansion had been chaotic, with families scattered across the galaxy by economic necessity and political upheaval. Promises to return, to send for loved ones, to stay in touch. They'd all been broken by the simple realities of distance and time. He never stopped trying to find you, I continued. Every port we stopped at, every communication hub, every passenger manifest. He was always looking, always hoping. But he found you instead. Actually, I found him. Remember? Spaceport bar, 3 drinks in, contemplating my mortality. And he decided to save your world instead of looking for me. There was hurt in her voice, and I couldn't blame her for it. But she was wrong about the sequence of events, and I needed her to understand that. No, Zara. He decided to save my world because he couldn't find you. He said that if he couldn't be a father to his own daughter, at least he could help someone else's family have a future. That shut her up. I could hear her thinking, processing, trying to reconcile the father she remembered with the man I was describing. The day he finished the last atmospheric processor, I said, he sat down on a hill overlooking the main settlement and just smiled. First time I'd seen him genuinely happy since I'd met him. The air was clean, the water was pure, the soil was fertile. 3 million people could live good lives on a world that had been dead just 2 years earlier. 3 million? Refugees from a dozen different worlds. Your dad had been quietly spreading the word through the underground networks. Anyone who needed a new start. Anyone who'd been displaced by the hegemony's expansion. Anyone who just wanted a chance to build something better. He gave them all a home, and that's when I understood what James Kellerman really was. Not just an engineer, not just a terraformer, but a gardener. He planted seeds, not just of plants and trees, but of hope, of community, of possibility. But he didn't stay to see it grow, Zara said. No, he left the day after the last family arrived. Said his work was done and it was time to move on. Time to keep looking for me. Time to keep looking for you. I'd tried to convince him to stay, of course. Offered him a place in the government we were setting up, a home in the city he'd designed, a chance to see the fruits of his labor flourish. But James Kellerman was a man driven by purpose, and his purpose was finding his daughter. He gave me this ship, I said, patting the console of bad decisions. Said I'd need it to keep an eye on things, to help people who needed help. Make sure his work didn't go to waste. And you've been doing that for 3 years? 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. But who's counting? Actually, I was counting. Every day since James had left, I'd been counting. Because I'd made him a promise, and promises to dead friends are the kind you keep. How did you know he was dead? Zara asked quietly. Because he would have found you by now if he wasn't. He was the most stubborn, determined, relentless person I've ever met. If James Kellerman was still alive, nothing in the galaxy would have stopped him from tracking you down. It was a hard truth, but it was the truth. James had been searching for 3 years when I met him, and he'd had leads, connections, resources. If he'd been alive for the past 3 years, he would have found her. Where? She asked. Asteroid belt, near the Vega system. Pirates hit his transport. No survivors. I'd gotten the news 4 months ago, through the same underground networks James had used to find refugees for our world. His ship had been identified in the wreckage, his body recovered and identified. He'd died as he'd lived, helping others. The transport had been carrying medical supplies to a colony world when the pirates attacked. I'm sorry, I said. I know that's not the ending you wanted. It's the ending I expected, she replied, and there was something in her voice that made me sit up straighter. I've been looking for him too, you know, for the past 5 years. 5 years? Ever since I graduated from the academy. I've been tracking refugee movements, following up on sightings, chasing down every lead. I knew he was alive, and I knew he was looking for me. Why didn't you stay put? Make it easier for him to find you? She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Because I'm his daughter. Sitting still and waiting for rescue isn't in my DNA. Fair point. From what I'd seen of James, patience wasn't exactly a family trait. So what now? I asked. You found someone who knew him, got your answers. What's next? Now I want to see it. See what? The world he built. The people he saved. The legacy he left behind. I should have seen that coming. Of course she'd want to see her father's greatest work. Of course she'd want to understand what had driven him. What had given his life meaning in those final years. It's not exactly a tourist destination, I warned her. We're still building, still figuring things out. And the hegemony isn't thrilled about having a thriving independent world right in their backyard. I can handle myself. I'm sure you can. But can you handle 3 million people who are going to want to thank you for having the father you had? Because that's what would happen. The moment word got out that James Kellerman's daughter had come to visit, every single person on Kepler 442c would want to shake her hand, tell her their story, express their gratitude for the man who'd given them a second chance. I think I can manage, she said dryly. All right, but I'm warning you, the hero worship can get a bit intense. Your dad is basically a legend down there. They've got statues and everything. Statues? 3 of them, 1 in each major city. All of him in his work clothes, holding different tools. The one in New Haven shows him with an atmospheric processor. The one in Kellertown has him holding a soil analyzer. And the one in Paradise Falls depicts him with a weather controller. They named a city after him? They wanted to name them all after him. I had to talk them out of it. Figured James would have been embarrassed by the attention. Actually, I knew he would have been embarrassed. The man had been constitutionally incapable of accepting praise or recognition. He'd preferred to work in the background, to let others take credit for his achievements. It was part of what made him so effective. Nobody saw him coming until it was too late. All right, Zara said finally. I'm coming to see this world my father built. But I have conditions. Such as? No ceremonies. No speeches. No official welcomes. I want to see what he built, not what people want to tell me about what he built. That's going to be tricky. Like I said, you're basically royalty there. Then don't tell them who I am. I thought about it. It would be difficult, but not impossible. Zara was a common enough name, and Kellerman wasn't exactly unique. If we were careful, we could probably give her a tour without triggering the inevitable celebration. What's your cover story? I asked. I'm a xenobiologist studying successful terraforming projects. Which technically is true. And I'm your guide? You're my guide. Simple as that. All right. But when this inevitably goes sideways, and you end up giving a speech to a crowd of grateful colonists, I'm going to remind you that I warned you. Deal. Where do you want to meet? I'm currently in the Centauri system, wrapping up a research project. I can be at Kepler 442c in 2 weeks. 2 weeks it is. I'll have guest quarters ready for you. Just don't make a big deal out of it, okay? Wouldn't dream of it. I cut the comm connection and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the stars. 2 weeks to prepare for the arrival of James Kellerman's daughter. 2 weeks to figure out how to show her the world her father had built, without overwhelming her with the gratitude of 3 million people. This was going to be interesting. 2 weeks later, I was standing in the spaceport of New Haven, watching Zara's ship, a sleek research vessel called Distant Shores, descend through the atmosphere. The sky was the perfect shade of blue that James had engineered, with just enough clouds to make it interesting, but not enough to block the twin suns. I'd managed to keep her arrival quiet, but just barely. Word had gotten out that a xenobiologist was coming to study our terraforming project, and there was considerable excitement in the scientific community. Fortunately, excitement wasn't the same as recognition. The ship touched down with barely a whisper, and I found myself holding my breath as the airlock cycled. I'd seen pictures of Zara in the files I'd pulled from the refugee networks, but they'd been old, from before she'd left for the academy. I wasn't sure what to expect. The airlock opened and she stepped out. She looked exactly like her father, not in the obvious ways. She was shorter, slighter, with long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. But she had his eyes, his posture, his way of taking in everything around her with a single sweeping glance. And when she spotted me across the landing pad, she smiled with the same quiet confidence that had convinced me to trust a stranger in a spaceport bar 3 years ago. "You must be Hendrix," she said, walking over with her hand extended. "Guilty as charged," I replied, shaking her hand. "And you must be the xenobiologist who's definitely not here to see statues of her father." She laughed. "Definitely not. Though I have to admit I'm curious about the atmospheric composition. The readings I got during descent were remarkable. Your father was a perfectionist. He didn't just want the air to be breathable. He wanted it to be perfect." "How perfect? See for yourself." I gestured toward the city spread out below us. New Haven was built into the side of a mountain, with terraced levels that followed the natural contours of the rock. James had designed it to work with the landscape rather than against it, creating a settlement that looked like it had grown there naturally. "It's beautiful," Zara said softly. "Wait until you see the residential districts. Your dad had some very specific ideas about how people should live." We took a transport down into the city proper, and I watched Zara's face as we passed through the different levels. The commercial district was bustling with activity, but not chaotic. The residential areas were quiet and green, with plenty of open space for families to gather. The industrial sections were clean and efficient, with none of the pollution or noise that typically characterized manufacturing centers. "He really did think of everything," she murmured, watching children play in a park that had been built around a natural spring. "He said cities should be places where people could be happy, not just survive." We stopped at a small cafe in the market district, and I ordered us both coffee. The beans were grown locally, another of James's innovations. He'd engineered a coffee plant that could thrive in the local soil while producing beans with a unique flavor profile. "Tell me about the people," Zara said, sipping her coffee and watching the crowd move through the market. "What do you want to know?" "How did they adapt? I mean, you're talking about 3 million refugees from dozens of different worlds, with different cultures, different languages, different ways of life. How do they all get along?" It was a good question, and one that had been on my mind a lot in the early days. The potential for conflict had been enormous. Take that many displaced people from that many different backgrounds, put them on a new world, and ask them to build a society together? It should have been a disaster. "Your father built more than just a world," I said. "He built a community. Every decision he made, from the layout of the cities to the design of the public spaces, was meant to encourage interaction and cooperation. Such as, the central plazas are designed so that people from different residential districts naturally cross paths. The work schedules are staggered so that different cultural groups share meal times. The schools are integrated not just by age but by background. Social engineering? Exactly, but subtle social engineering. People think they're making their own choices, but the environment is guiding them toward positive interactions." Zara nodded slowly. "That's brilliant. And it's working?" "See for yourself." I gestured around the cafe. At the table next to us, a family of Centaurian refugees was sharing a meal with what looked like a human couple and their teenage daughter. Across the room, a group of Andromedan traders was deep in conversation with a table of local farmers, presumably discussing some kind of agricultural exchange. "They're not just coexisting," Zara observed. They're actually interacting. That's the difference between a refugee camp and a community. Your dad understood that. We finished our coffee and continued the tour. I showed her the atmospheric processing stations, the agricultural sectors, the manufacturing districts, the research facilities. Each area was a testament to James's vision of what a human settlement could be. Efficient without being sterile, productive without being exploitative, modern without losing touch with the natural world. But it was when we reached the residential district that Zara finally broke down. This is where most of the families with children live, I explained, leading her through a neighborhood of small, comfortable houses surrounded by gardens. Your dad spent extra time on this area, said it was the most important part of the whole project. The houses were modest but well-designed, with enough space for privacy but not so much that neighbors felt isolated. The streets were wide enough for children to play safely, but narrow enough to maintain a sense of community. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were places for kids to explore, to learn, to grow. He built this for me, Zara said quietly, stopping in front of a playground where a dozen children were playing some kind of elaborate game involving climbing structures and anti-gravity balls. He built it for all of them, I corrected gently. But yeah, he was thinking about you. How do you know? Because he told me. He said every child deserved a place where they could be safe, where they could learn, where they could dream about the future. He said he'd failed to give that to his own daughter, but maybe he could give it to someone else's. Zara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I had that. Growing up on Earth, before everything went wrong, I had that. He knew. He just wished he could have given you more. We stood there for a while, watching the children play. The game they were playing seemed to involve creating elaborate structures with the anti-gravity balls, and then knocking them down in spectacular fashion. It was joyful, creative, and completely pointless. Exactly the kind of thing kids should be doing. What happens now? Zara asked finally. What do you mean? To this place. To these people. The hegemony isn't going to let an independent world thrive indefinitely. They'll find a way to bring you back under their control. She was right, of course. We'd been lucky so far. The hegemony had been dealing with larger problems elsewhere in the galaxy. But eventually they'd turn their attention back to us, and when they did, our independence would be at risk. Your father thought of that too, I said. He left us with more than just a world. What do you mean? The patents, the technology, the knowledge. Everything he used to build this place, he made sure we understood it, could replicate it, could improve on it. We're not just consumers of his work, we're inheritors of it. And that's enough to keep the hegemony at bay? It's enough to make us valuable to them, more valuable as partners than as subjects. The truth was, I wasn't sure it would be enough. The hegemony had a way of taking what they wanted regardless of legalities or ethics. But it was the best chance we had, and it was the plan James had left us. I want to help, Zara said suddenly. Help how? I don't know yet. But this is my father's legacy. I'm not going to let the hegemony destroy it. I looked at her carefully. You sure about that? Because getting involved in this fight could change your life pretty dramatically. You've got a career, a life somewhere else. You don't owe us anything. I owe him everything, she said fiercely. And I owe you for taking care of what he built. You don't owe me anything either. I owe you for being his friend when he needed one. I owe you for listening to his stories about me. I owe you for making sure his work didn't die with him. She was crying again, but these were different tears. These were tears of gratitude, of resolution, of purpose. Besides, she said, wiping her eyes again, what kind of daughter would I be if I didn't finish what my father started? I grinned. The kind who didn't inherit his stubbornness? Too late for that. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same spaceport bar where I'd first met James Kellerman, nursing a whiskey and watching the news feeds. The hegemony had just announced a new partnership agreement with the independent world of Kepler 442c, granting us full autonomy in exchange for licensing rights to our terraforming technology. It wasn't a perfect deal, but it was a fair one. And more importantly, it was a deal that would let us keep building, keep growing, keep being the kind of community James had envisioned. The architect of the agreement was sitting across from me, reviewing the final contracts with the same focused intensity her father had brought to atmospheric processors and soil analyzers. You know, I said, he would have been proud of you. Zara looked up from her tablet. You think so? I know so. You negotiated a better deal than anyone thought possible. You found a way to protect 3 million people without compromising our independence. You did what he would have done. I had a good teacher. He left you more than lessons. He left you a world full of people who believe in the same things he believed in. That's a pretty powerful legacy. She nodded slowly. I'm thinking about staying. Here? Here. There's still so much work to do. The terraforming is just the beginning. We need to study how the ecosystem develops, how the social structures evolve, how the technology adapts to new challenges.
And you want to be part of that? I want to be part of what my father started. Is that crazy?
Probably. But it's the good kind of crazy. She laughed, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father had looked the day he'd finished the last atmospheric processor. Genuinely happy, genuinely hopeful about the future. "There's something I want to show you," she said, pulling up a new file on her tablet.
What is it?
"A proposal I've been working on. A new project based on everything we've learned here." I leaned forward to look at the screen. The proposal was for a series of new settlements, each designed to support a specific type of refugee population. One for victims of environmental disasters, one for political refugees, one for economic migrants. Each settlement would be tailored to the specific needs of its inhabitants, but all would be connected by trade, communication, and shared governance. "You want to build more worlds," I said. "I want to build a network of worlds. Places where people can go when they need a fresh start, where they can contribute to something larger than themselves." That's ambitious. It's what he would have wanted. He saved one world, but there are millions of people out there who need saving. Why stop at one? I looked at the proposal again, at the detailed plans and careful calculations. It was brilliant, ambitious, and completely insane. It was also exactly the kind of project that James Kellerman would have loved. "You're going to need help," I said. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'm in, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "We name the first settlement after him. Not Kellertown, that's too obvious. Something subtle. Something he would have appreciated." Zara smiled. "I was thinking Haven's Rest, a place where wanderers can find peace." "Perfect." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars through the bar's main viewport. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between worlds, there were people who needed what we were building. People who needed hope, who needed a second chance, who needed someone to believe in them. James Kellerman had started something bigger than himself, and now it was up to us to keep it going. It was a big responsibility, but it was also the kind of work that made life worth living. "You know what the best part is?" Zara said eventually. "What's that?" "He's not really gone. Every time someone breathes clean air on this world, every time a child plays in one of those parks, every time a family finds a safe place to call home, he's still here." She was right. James Kellerman lived on in every decision he'd made, every system he'd built, every life he'd touched. He'd left us more than a world. He'd left us a way of thinking, a way of approaching problems, a way of believing that things could be better. And that, I thought, was the most human thing of all. "To James," I said, raising my glass. "To James," Zara agreed, raising hers. We drank to the memory of a man who'd built worlds and saved lives and never stopped believing in the possibility of a better tomorrow. And then we got back to work, because that's what he would have wanted. After all, there were still 3 million people counting on us. And somewhere out there, in the darkness between stars, there were millions more who needed someone to believe in them. It was going to be a hell of a job, but that's what humans do. The impossible, the improbable, the absolutely necessary. We build worlds, save lives, and leave legacies that outlast our own brief candle flames. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get to do it in the company of people who understand that the work is more important than the glory. James Kellerman had understood that. His daughter understood it too. And that, more than all the terraforming technology and social engineering in the galaxy, was what gave me hope for the future. The work would continue. The dream would grow. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, more wanderers would find their way home.